Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is Levi. I'm just going to jump right into it today. We're going to be covering some more of the model application training for District 3. And today, we're going to be focusing more on some activity lessons. So yesterday was a bit more of an overview of how does the software work, what are some recommended workflows, what are different types of ways that you can use the software. Today, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be covering different types of alternative scenario analyses that you might be doing and how to actually implement those in the software, as well as what to do after you have that. So we're going to start with a network build. I've picked a spot where we're going to just do a road extension as well as a new interchange. And then we're going to do a land use update after that. We're going to get into the zones and reconfigure the zones, similar to how you might do a short range or a long range forecast. So we're going to be updating population data on the zone level. And then just like yesterday, after that, we'll take a break, probably about halfway through, do a short Q&A. And then in the second half, we will pick up with adding public transit elements to the network. So adding stops and public transit lines to the network. And then we'll finish out the day with reviewing some scenarios. So looking at how can we configure some graphic parameters to look at some data, as well as those transfer files again, just kind of recovering those transfer files again in a different way, so we can share data between scenarios. Okay, so today we're going to start with a network build scenario. So this time I'm going to be kind of jumping back and forth between the software, but to kind of keep the whiplash down, I'll describe what we're going to do via PowerPoint, and then we'll jump over into the software and we'll just kind of go through the whole process together. So that way you have a good roadmap of where we're going to go. So here, what we're going to do is we are going to provide new infrastructure. This build is strictly going to be adding new turns, nodes, and links to the network that will add potential path opportunities to the existing demand. We're not going to touch the demand. We're not going to touch any of the other methodologies, just the physical network. How do we add objects? How do we edit objects with regard to links, nodes, and turns in Visum? All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to extend Edenfield Road out to Centerville Road. This is kind of out near Tallahassee, kind of northeast of Tallahassee a little bit. And then we're going to add a new interchange for Centerville Road at I-10. And this will involve moving some nodes around, as well as adding some one-way ramp terminals. So we'll get a good view of how to build a two-way link, how to build one-way links, and how to edit turns and things like that. So what we're going to start by doing is opening up the existing base model, the 2015 base model, and then we're going to save it as a new file, as a new build file, because we don't want to copy over the base model. We want to keep the base model as is. And it's important to remember that throughout this process, save early, save often, so that way we can make sure that we're not losing any data if we have any sort of unfortunate crashes or anything like that. For ease of use, we have we've set up some already in the model. There are some points of interest that kind of outline where the build is going to be. Now, for actual model builds, you're probably going to be using something like a site plan, or you're going to have some sort of images or anything like that that you can kind of look at. Here, what we've done is we've taken shape files and we've imported them as points of interest that we can use to trace over with our links and nodes. We're going to be using some graphic parameters to help us look through this. And then what we're going to do is drop it on there so that we can see the actual points of interest. And then we're going to zoom in on the build site and start building out the network. So what that will entail is we are going to zoom in on this particular road extension, and we're going to start adding new elements into the network. So just to kind of talk through the process, and then we'll go into the actual software and do it. What that's going to look like is that we already have a node down here at Mikosuke Road. It's just a T intersection, but what we're going to do is we're going to be adding a leg to that. And we need a new node at the Centerville Road, on the Centerville Road link. So what that's going to look like is we're going to first start by splitting the link at Centerville Road. This will create a new node for us that we can operate off of to build a new link. So in order to split the node, what it's going to look like is we're going to select the links objects. And then we can just right click on the link itself, and there's an option to split the link. Then we're going to go ahead and add in a new link. And so this is going to be a new process that we haven't talked about quite yet. Once we add in in order to add in the new link, we need to select the insert button option. So up to this point, the default setting is the edit option, where you see the little cursor up in the corner of the network editor. In this case, if you want to add or create new objects, you'll click that little plus button. And then from there, we can just left click on some existing nodes and go through and add in the link. What that'll look like is as we follow this point of interest, the shapefile, we're going to be left clicking to add intermediate points as we go. Since this is a two-way link, you can start on the north side and work your way down, or you can start on the south side and work your way up. It doesn't really matter which direction you draw the link in. Now, when we move on to future one-way links for the off-ramps and on-ramps, the direction in which you build the link will be important. But for now, since there's going to be two directions, you can go in either way. Once you get down to the destination node of the link, you can just left click on that destination node, and it will open up our link editor. So before we get into the link specifics, this is a good chance to jump over, and we'll get up to this point where we've built out our link here, and then we can edit the parameters of the link when we get to that point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over into our software. So we're into Visum, and I'm going to open up the 2015 model, or I have the 2015 model open up. So I'm going to give you all a second to do that. If you haven't already, please open up the 2015 base year model. Okay. Again, to open the model, you can just left click and drag that version file into Visum, or if you haven't opened Visum yet, you can just right click on the version file and select Open with Visum 2022. All right. So once we have the model file open, this should be fairly familiar at this point as to what it looks like. The next step that we're going to do is first, before we do any edits to the software or to the model file, we're going to go to File, and we're going to click the Save As option. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename it something like Training Build. Just something descriptive. Make sure you hit the Save button. The reason we want to save before doing any edits is because the second we start adding new links or nodes to the network, it's going to delete it's going to initialize the assignment, and we want to keep the assignment of the 2015 model already run, so we don't have to rerun the procedure sequence. So in this case, by saving first, you don't have to worry about accidentally initializing your assignment. Okay, so now that we have our model file opened and saved as a new model file, to make it a little bit easier to see, I'm going to use this drop down next to the globe. And because the links are kind of dark and all of the background is kind of dark, I'm going to switch to the PTV default instead of this black marble. So again, next to the globe, we can hit PTV default. And then in our training files, under the graphics section, we have a pre-formatted new build graphic parameter file or map layout file. So again, if you go into the graphics folder of your training examples, we have this new build.gpa. And again, this doesn't affect our assignment or anything. It just affects the graphic representation of our model. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag and drop that onto our network editor. And then we're going to make sure we read in all the graphic parameters and click OK. And what this should do is this should zoom in to the location of our new build. So when we saved this new build.gpa file, it also saves your zoom level. So if you have a certain site that you're working on, you can save that as part of your graphic parameters file. So you go File, Save File As, Graphic Parameters. So once you've found the location you want to work with, and you have all your graphic settings, you can save this, and then it will kind of remember where you were when you saved this GPA file. All right, so what we see here are object types called points of interest. Points of interest, they can be single points, they can be lines, they could also be geometry. So you could have circles or other geometric shapes that represent something of interest. It doesn't necessarily have to be a build, it could be a study area or something like that. But we can generate these generally using a shapefile import. So if you have a transit line or something like that that you want to eventually build, you can import these shape files as a point of interest to kind of give you guidance on where something might go. Additionally, there are some things that you can auto import as a shape file, like links and other things like that. But for now, we're going to manually build everything out. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to build out this Edenfield Road extension. So in order to do that, we need a link with a node at both ends. And you can see here, this Centerville Road link over here doesn't have a node in the middle where we want the two links to meet. So in this case, what we can do is we're going to select the links object up in the object list. And this will give us the ability to add or edit the links specifically. Yes, we want to build a node, but if we want to build a node on an existing link, it's easier just to split the link than to create a new node and then try and merge it with other nodes or with a link. So in this case, we're going to start with the links. We're going to make sure that we have the edit mode on because we want to edit an existing link. So make sure you have this edit mode selected. And then for this Centerville Road link that we have here, you can just find anywhere on the link, you can just right click to open up our context menu. So again, make sure you have links selected. And it doesn't really matter which direction you have selected because the node is going to split the link in both directions anyway. So just right click on the link and then select the split option. Once you select the split option, it's going to look something like this. It's going to have a little white square, and you can see two dotted lines as it's kind of previewing where the link would go if you were to left click. So if you get close enough to the link, it'll snap down. So if you want to keep the same geometry of the link, but just split it somewhere in the middle, you can kind of snap onto the link itself. So in this case, I'm going to make sure the white dot is kind of right where that star would be. And then I'm going to left click on the link. So again, find where your intersection is going to be, and then you just left click once. You're probably going to get this warning that comes up. And basically, this is what I was talking about before. This is why we save ahead of time. It would delete the assignment, and so you're just going to click yes, and that's fine. So to do it one more time, again, make sure you have the links set up. So you have the links selected, you have the edit mode selected, and then we're going to find the link that we want to split, and we are going to right click on it. So you don't have to select it first or anything, you just need to make sure it's highlighted. So get your cursor near the link and make sure it's highlighted. And then you're going to right click anywhere on the link and use the split option. Again, you need to just the big thing is that you make sure you have links selected. If you have nodes selected or something like that, you won't have the split option available. Then once you've selected the split option, you should get a little white box. In this white box, you want to put it where the intersection is going to be. And if you get close enough to the link, it'll snap down onto the link. So just put this white box kind of where that point of interest line intersects with our existing infrastructure line. And then you can just left click once, and that will create your new node. If you get a warning, just click yes. That's just asking if you want to initialize the assignment. So by the end of it, you should have a link coming into this intersection and a link coming out of this intersection with a node kind of in the middle. Okay. Once we have our nodes in place, so we should have a node at this end and a node at this end. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to select the insert mode, and we're going to add in our new link. So if we're going to add in our new link, make sure you have the links object selected. And then at the top of your network editor, you're going to see a little plus button next to this cursor. This is to switch it over into insert mode. So this is where we can tell Visum that we want to create a new object rather than edit existing objects. So we're going to select this plus button. And you can see at the top of the network editor, it says network editor insert links. So that tells you what you're inserting right now. Okay. Now, as you move your cursor onto the network editor, you'll see it has a little do not enter sign or something like that. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to find either the node at Centerville or this node down here at Miccosukee Road. Either way, I'm going to start up at the top and just kind of move my way down. So I'm going to hover my cursor over that node, and I'm going to left click one time. So I'm just going to left click once, and that will start my my drawing of the link. And so if I move my mouse away, you can see that we now have a dotted line with a little white square. That's giving me a preview of what my link is going to look like. And so what I can do is I can follow this point of interest line, and I can just left click occasionally at key geometry points. So here I can left click because this is mostly straight. And so now I have a nice little geometric point right there. And the closer my geometry points are spaced, the smoother the curve will be. So I'm just left clicking, just gently left clicking every couple hundred feet or so, just trying to make sure that the curvature kind of looks fairly close to what we get. You can spend a lot of time on this and get the curvature exactly perfect. The big thing that you want to look at, though, is the link length at the end. So once you're satisfied with the structure of your link, you can left click on this end node down here at Miccosukee Road, and that should end the link construction process for you. So once we get down to this bottom node, we're going to left click on it once, and that'll bring up our link editor. So once again, you start by hitting the insert mode button, left click on the starting link, the from link, or sorry, the from node, and then you just left click sequentially down the course of the link, and it will it'll give it that geometry as you build it out. And then whichever node you click on next will be the to link for this particular, or the to node for this particular link. We can see it's going from node 40,259, and it's going to node 34,311 or 313 down here. Okay. Once we have our node built out, the next step we want to do is we want to configure our node. Or sorry, configure our link. I keep miscommunicating that. So we're building the link. We want to define a type of link in both directions. Now, a link type is just a link template, basically. It will give you it'll open up or close certain transportation systems from being able to use that link. It'll give it a certain default number of lanes and a default capacity and a default speed. So in this case, we're just going to select the other local undivided roadway. And in this case, that's link type number 46 for the main direction. Now, this first direction that we pick, this first type up above, is going to be in the direction of travel that we drew the link. So since I drew the link from north to south, this initial type is going to be the southbound movement. And then this secondary type right here is going to be the northbound movement. So in this case, for our southbound roadway, it's going to be link type number 46. And since this link is going to be the same in both directions, we can just leave the lower type on like outer direction or outward direction. And so what this will do is this will just copy over the link type that we selected up above. So you don't have to go find it again or anything like that. So in our model, we're going to use this drop down, and here you can see we have quite a few different link types that you can pick from. In this case, we are going to find link number 46. And then we want to confirm what the, oh, sorry, got a question about building the links real quick. If you accidentally connected, so question is, if you accidentally connect to the wrong node, can you undo it? Yeah, so if you're looking at the structure of your link and you say, oh, we accidentally connected to the wrong node or something like that, you can just hit cancel and that will undo what you just did and you can kind of restart the process. You didn't show the undo. Huh? Undo. Oh, yeah. If you've already finished the link and you've gone through this process, you can hit the undo button as well. And so we do have an undo if you've already completed the process. But if we're to this point right here, you don't have to hit the undo button. You can just hit cancel and restart. That's the other option that you have. Okay. So here, I've completed the link. I can click undo, and now it's undone that process right there. Yep. Okay. So now let's take a look at what the details that these link types are importing and see if they have all the right details. Because sometimes you might want to edit from the default link types. So in this case, I'm going to hit the details button. Once I've selected link type 46, I'm going to hit details right here. Okay. Once we're in the details section, the key factors that we want to input into our link settings are going to be the V0 PRT, which is the initial speed. Again, this is the free flow speed or the unassigned speed. So you're going to set this because this is what Visum is going to use to compare to the assigned speed or the congested speed. So V0 is just referencing the initial speed there. The other factor that we'll want to set is the capacity. In this case, we're doing a 24-hour model. It's not a peak period or anything like that. So in this case, the capacity that we're going to be entering is going to be a daily capacity, not an hourly capacity. So if you know your hourly capacities, you'll just have to multiply it by whatever your time interval is to give it a daily capacity. So in this model, you can see that the initial speed that was brought in was 31 miles per hour. So I'm just going to switch that over to 30 miles per hour. And then the capacity in this case is set to 999. That's just a default setting. So we're going to switch this over to 5200. Now, if we wanted to edit the opposite direction in a different way, if we wanted to have, say, for example, a different number of lanes or a different speed in the opposite direction or a different capacity in the opposite direction, what we can do is we can click the little opposite button down in the corner. And that will switch to looking at the opposite direction. So if you can see on the screen right now, the red arrow is pointing downwards. You see a little arrowhead pointing down. So this is indicating that we're working on the southbound direction. If I click the opposite key, you can see that the arrow shifts to the top. So that's telling me that we're working on the northbound direction. To save time from having to repeat these edits on the opposite direction, if it's exactly the same, you can just click this transfer changes to opposite direction button. And that will copy whatever you set on your initial direction to the other direction as well. Now, the reason these boxes are yellow is because this is indicating that the opposite direction has different user or different attribute values than the current direction that we're looking at. So for example, this is 30 in the southbound, and it's 31 in the northbound. If I were to change this to 30 in the northbound as well, you see how the box no longer is yellow. That's because both directions have the same value. So this is like a way to double check to see if you've set both links in the same way, or if you want to keep them in different ways, then that's fine. You can also just select this transfer changes to opposite direction, and that will take whatever values you have in any of these cells, and it will automatically transpose them onto the other side. All right, once you click OK, you should be done with the link. If you're done edit or creating new links, I would recommend just clicking back to this edit mode. If you click back to this edit mode, then it will take it out of the insert mode, and you can come back in, you can double click on this link and get back into this link editor. All right. We had a question come in, sorry, just real quick, talking about if what this will show up as if we're using that review mode that we used yesterday, where we compare and contrast networks. This initial link that we split will show as edited, and then we'll have two new added links that were created. And so you would see a green plus button with 2 plus links, and then you would see this link with a modified moniker next to it, so a little blue star. So all of these changes can still be tracked by those transfer networks. Okay, so it'll remember what executions we've done to update this, and it'll keep track of that in that transfer network portal. Some more questions coming in about these. In terms of the capacity, this is a link-based capacity, not a lane-based capacity. So if you have, for example, a freeway with like HOV lanes or something like that, you're going to model that as 2 parallel links that might have different capacities if the lanes have different capacities. Whereas here, you're going to take your capacity, you're going to multiply it by your number of lanes. And then there was another question about, is there a speed capacity table? And we can find that in the user defined attributes table. So there is a speed capacity table as well. Okay, sorry, a lot of questions coming in. Just making sure we're keeping up with all of them. Okay. All right, so now that we have this extension completed, We've built out our link. We've added the appropriate inputs to the link. So now that if we were to rerun our procedure sequence, the path choice should be able to look at it. Now, there are still a couple things that we need to do at either end of the node with regard to the turns. But I'm going to talk about that in a couple minutes when we get to editing turns. Basically, just because we added a link doesn't necessarily guarantee that these turns have opened up, so we'll want to go double check and make sure that all the turns, for example, are northbound through or at this Mikosuki Road, Sugi Road. We want to make sure that eastbound left, the westbound right, and the northbound through are all open, as well as all the southbound movements are open at that intersection. But we'll circle back around to turns in a couple minutes when we finish up with the links of the interchange. Okay, so now we're going to go up and we're going to edit this interchange. What that's going to look like is we're going to start by editing some of the nodes by moving them to a new location. So we're going to start by taking the existing nodes that are on the links that we can see just below the star and just above that star, and we're going to realign them onto the star. So we're going to be able to move around the existing geometry. It's not necessarily locked in position. And then we're going to edit some existing links on the freeway and do just like we did before. And we're going to split the freeway to create an opportunity for off-ramps and on-ramps. And we're going to create the ramp terminals. Now, in terms of this, the ramp links themselves are going to be one-way links. So it's important that we select the correct link type and that we close the opposite direction. So the key here is that we're going to be building the links in the direction of travel. And then we are going to be closing the opposite direction because we do not want any path choices to be getting onto these links or anything like that, going in the opposite direction. And then we're going to set the capacities, and then we're going to configure the turns. So let's jump back into our model, and I'm going to zoom in on our points of interest around this interchange. So the first thing we're going to do is select the nodes objects. So make sure you have nodes selected and make sure you're on this edit mode. So we want to edit nodes. We don't necessarily need to create new ones because the existing nodes are already here. We have this node and we have this node. We're just going to realign them so that they line up with the proposed intersections in the new build. So I'm going to take this node, I'm going to left click on it so that we can see its ID number, and then you can just left click and drag it onto the star. You can zoom in to get it a little bit more accurate. So the closer you zoom in, the more accuracy you're going to get on this. You can just move the node like that. And I'm going to move the node on the south side as well. Now we have available nodes for these ramps. So if we come over to the west side of the interchange, there are already some nodes that exist. We can move these nodes into position as well. And so now we have nodes for these ramps on the west side. We just need the nodes for the east side ramps as well. So we need the westbound off ramp and the eastbound on ramp. So I'm going to select my links again, just like we did before on the Centerville Road. And then we are going to select the insert mode option, or sorry, not the insert mode, the edit mode option, and we're going to split the freeway links, again, by hovering over the freeway link and we can right click on it and say split. So again, we're going to split the freeway link where the ramp starts. Same thing with the eastbound link, right click, split the link right there. Now we should have our freeway link split, and we should have a node available to create a link off of for our ramps. So now we're going to go in and start creating our ramps. So I'm going to make sure I have links selected. I'm going to click the plus button. And then I'm going to left click on this node. And if the ramp had any sort of curvature or anything like that, we could do as before and create intermediate points on our way to the destination of the link. But in this case, it's a fairly straight ramp. So I'm just going to left click at the intersection up at the top of the overpass. In this case, we have some predefined link types for off ramps and on ramps. So in this case, we're going to select link type number 71 for on ramps and link type number 77 for off ramps. And again, link types are just templates for the link. They'll autofill a lot of the parameters, but we should still always check the parameters just to make sure that maybe there's some localized edits that we want to make or calibrations that we want to make. So since this is an off ramp, we're going to use link type number 77, other off ramp. You can see we have some loop off ramps, loop off ramps, and things like that as well. And click OK. Oh, and before we click OK, actually, make sure you're closing the opposite direction. And then when we go into the details, for this one, in this case, for the off-ramp, we want it to be a 45 mile per hour off-ramp. And we want the capacity to be 8,800 vehicles per day. Now, since these are all yellow, that is fine because if you remember, we closed the opposite direction. And so by closing the opposite direction, the transport systems that are allowed to use this link is empty. So we don't have to worry about the opposite direction, and we don't have to really worry about coding any of this because nobody's going to be using this link anyway. So in this case, for one directional links like off ramps or on ramps or one-way streets, or if you're doing a divided highway where you're drawing each direction as their own link, you'll want to close the opposite direction and just draw the links in the direction of travel. Next, we'll click OK. So that is one off-ramp completed. I'm going to do an on-ramp now. So for this eastbound on-ramp, I'm going to left-click at the top of the ramp, and again, drawing it in the direction of travel. I can left-click to add intermediate points if I need to, and then I will find the node at the destination. I will left-click, and in this case, we want to use the link type 71, which is a freeway on-ramp. And just as before, make sure we close the opposite direction. So again, we're drawing from the intersection down to the freeway. clicking freeway on-ramp, details. In this case, it's also going to be a 45-mile-per-hour on-ramp, 1 lane, and the capacity for the on-ramps in this model are generally going to be 16,400. If we take a look around at other on-ramps, this is roughly what most of them are going to be, or a lot of the nearby ones are going to be looking like, at least. Again, we have yellow transport systems, yellow speed, and yellow capacity because the opposite direction is all closed, so it doesn't have a capacity or transport systems. Okay. We can do the same for this off-ramp. Make sure it's link number 77 for other off-ramp. Details, 45, and then 8,800. Double check that the opposite direction is closed. Click OK. And then for the westbound on-ramp, do the same thing. In this case, it's going to be a freeway on-ramp. Make sure it's closed. Hit details. 45 miles per hour, 16,400 daily volume capacity. Make sure the opposite direction is closed, and then just click OK. Give you a minute or two to finish those up. After you finish, make sure you click the edit mode just so that you're not accidentally inserting any objects randomly in your network. And if you want to double check your edits, you can always double click on a link. And once you're in the edit mode, if you double click on a link, it'll bring this editor back up. You can also mass edit the links. So if we wanted to update our on-ramps to have a different capacity or maybe a different number of lanes, you don't have to double click and then come in and edit using this editor. You can also use the quick view window. So if we look here off to the side, any object that I've selected shows their attributes in this quick view window. So for example, if I wanted to change this off-ramp to be 2 lanes, it doesn't look like we have the lane option, but we could always add the number of lanes option to this list. So I can just click this little attribute selection button, and then we find a number of lanes. Just like we would do in the actual list object lists, you can do the same thing in this quick view. And I can just update the number of lanes here without having to double click on a bunch of objects. The other benefit that gives us is we can multi-edit links. So for example, if you just wanted to throw down a bunch of links and then come back and hold the control key, you can multi-select both of your on-ramps, and you can update the capacities to say, I don't know, 17,000, for example, and you can update the capacities to both of your on-ramps. Or you can change the speed or something like that. So this quick view, as you become more used to the software and use it more, you'll probably end up using this quick view more than you will using this actual editor here, because it's just you don't have to double click on things and you can multi-edit. There's also an option if you to multi-edit mass number of objects. So if you just do a spatial selection and grab a handful of objects like this, you can right-click and there is an edit feature here that will allow you to multi-edit objects. So if you wanted to, I know we had a question about, can you copy and paste certain data points over to multiple links? This is how you would do that. You would find the attribute that you want to update, and then you would use either constant value or maybe you type in a custom formula for, say you wanted to update capacities. based on number of lanes, well, then you'd select the capacity option, and you can do a formula based on the link types and things like that. You could write out a whole formula for updating the capacities in mass just by what you've selected here. Okay. So now that we have our links in place, the next thing we want to make sure is that all of our turns are active and up to date. So in this case, jump back into the PowerPoint, go through this process. The next thing we want to do is we want to configure our turns. So we want to make sure that the correct vehicles are using the correct turns and everything like that, and that the turns have the correct initial delays and capacities. And so in this case, we're going to be introduced to some new parameters. One of them is going to be this T0 PRT. That represents the base level turn penalty, in this case for private transportation. So if a particular turn has just a base level delay, that's what you're going to be putting into this T0 PRT. We also have the TSYS set. This is basically what types of vehicles are allowed to make this turn. If you have, for example, a turn into a new residential neighborhood and you don't want to allow trucks to travel through your neighborhood, you would go into this TSYS set and you would turn it off. You turn trucks off. And then each turn type has an inbuilt volume delay function. Since we're not using signals or anything like that, we're not doing ICE or anything like that on these particular nodes, they're going to use turn types to determine what the turn penalties are once we start loading volumes on. So there are going to be functions assigned to each type of turn. So we have a few different ways that we can update the turns or check the turns. We can do it directly in the junction editor, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. We can also mass edit the turns in the turns list, just like any other object. So you can find the turn that you want to edit in the turns list, and you can edit it there. There's also a procedure sequence or procedure executable that we can do called edit attribute. And so here's an example of one way that you can mass edit your turns based on the turn types. So maybe you want to set initial turn penalties based on turn types. Instead of doing that manually for every turn in the network, you can just go into your procedure sequence and create a custom formula. And in this case, what it's doing is it has an if statement that is cycling through, checking the turn type 1, 2, 3, or 4, and it's giving it an initial turn penalty to that value in that T0 PRT. So those are the three main ways that we can update the turns in the network editor. Again, either directly in the junction editor, we can go a little bit more broad scale with the update in the list, or you can go completely uniform across the board and you can do an edit attribute as well. So what we need to do as a final thing for our ramps is we need to make sure that all the turns are active and maybe turn off some turns that we don't want active on our network. So in this case, what we're going to do is there's a couple ways we can go about this. We can select nodes, for example. And if I select the nodes object and make sure I'm on the edit mode, I can double click on any one of these 6 intersections that I've created, right? So for example, at the top of the ramps, I can double click on this node and it'll open up the junction editor. Now our junction editor gives us a little bit more detailed view of the network. It looks at the links and connections, and so we can look at the lanes specifically. So here we can see we have a 2-lane freeway, and then we have 1-lane off ramps, and then our north-south is 1 lane. Now in this case, we're using turn penalties and we're using node penalties. So we don't have the full intersection geometry, but that is something that you can do in Visum, is add in full intersection geometry with turn bays and turn islands and things like that. For this model, we have node impedances and turn penalties. So we're going to be using those as opposed to the full like ICE, HCM style analysis. In this case, once again, to get to this point, you just find any of your nodes and you double click on it that you want to edit. And so now we can see all the different turning movements. Since we closed the opposite direction of this link, you can see that we only have a left turn here. We don't have the opportunity. Oh, sorry, Chayton just reminded me, there are no node impedances, so it's all based on turn penalties in this case. So there's no node level impedances, just turn levels. So in this case, there's no right turn because this outbound link is closed. There's no southbound left turn, so we can see that we have the turns here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click the turn level here. And we can see all the different turning movements that are allowed at this node. In this case, we have 9 total turning movements. So each one of these turning movements is represented by a column of data. And as we click through them, we can see all the different types of turning movements. So for example, if we did not want to allow for this U-turn, we could come into where we can see the U-turn for the southbound U-turn. We could come into where it says T-sys set. And we can click on this T-sys set. And we can say select none. So again, to do that, we find the U-turn movement, the column that represents the U-turn. Now, a U-turn is always going to be turn type number 4. A right is always going to be turn type number 1. Straight is 2. 3 is left. And the U-turn is 4. So in this case, you can find the columns with the type number 4 in them. And I'm going to remove the ability for U-turns at this particular movement. And then I can click OK. And you can see now that we have one less column because that U-turn has been removed. If I hit the undo button, we can see that the turn is back. So I can select none. If you want to add a turn that isn't there, so say you wanted to add this U-turn back in and you can't hit undo because maybe you saved the project or it was never there in the first place, what you can do is just right click somewhere in this white space and you can say show all closed turns. And that will show that U-turn as a dotted line, meaning that it's closed. And so all you'd have to do is come back in to your T-sys set and specify which vehicles are allowed to utilize that turn. And once you have a T-sys set, it is now an open turn again. So for example, maybe you want to disallow trucks, but you want to keep passenger vehicles. So you can also multi-edit and select specific types of vehicles that are allowed to use that turn. Something like this. Select none. Again, we'll turn it off. Here, select none. We'll turn it off. Okay. If we want to move on to the next node, you can either close out of the junction editor or switch back to the geometry tab, and you can pan down to the next node and just left click on the next node. And then we can go back into the turns and look through all of our turns in the next node down. So again, to do that, click the geometry option to get back to this geometric view. And then you can just left click on a nearby node to select the next node over. So you don't have to go back into the network editor and double click on a node. You can do that, but it can be easier just to say, okay, I want to just double click on this node instead. And then come into the turn values. And here's the on ramp. So we have a through movement on ramp and then a through movement for the main line. The last place I want to look is I want to go back down to where we did our extension, and I want to just double check those nodes as well. So I'm going to click on this node. I'm going to go into turns, and I'm going to just make sure that we have all of our turning movements allowed. And so since we added the link, it should automatically open up those turns, but I just wanted to double check that those turns were open. And maybe we wanted to remove some U-turns or something like that. So it's always good after you add the link to just double check your junction geometry, just to make sure that the junction has been inputted correctly and that you're not missing any data. Now, if you remember back to yesterday, we did that compare and contrast networks, and it came up with that report of what was added and what was removed. The turns should also be in that report. So if you wanted to look at what turns were turned off or turned on, when you add the new links, it should create the new links and it should report that. It should also report all the new turns that were added to the nodes. So that should be pretty easy to find as well. All right. And once you have your links and your turns all active and ready to go, you're more or less done with your network build scenario in terms of adding new objects and adding all that. So now when we rerun our procedure sequence, Visum should be able to find paths that also utilize these movements. And we'd be able to see that if we ran our procedure all the way through again, we'd be able to see the reassignment of all of the volumes to these various new links that we have, and we'd be able to compare and contrast that to what did the path flows look like in the old file versus the new file. Okay, so our next example that we're going to work on is going to be a land use update example file. So before I get to there, what I'm going to do is just go back into the project. I'm going to hit the save button just so that we make sure and replace the file, just so we make sure that we have it saved. In this case, again, running the full procedure takes about 20 minutes, so I'm going to save that for a little bit later. I'm not going to run it right now. And then I'm going to reopen my initial base model, my 2015 base model year. I'm going to reopen that file just so we have a new starting point for our next project. Okay, now I have my 2015 base version file loaded up again. What we want to do now is we want to go through a land use update. So this might be something like a TIA or something like that, where you want to redevelop existing zones or add new zones or something like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to work through this as if it was a redevelopment of existing zones. So what we're going to do is we're going to be updating 4 zones in particular, zones 2646, 2647, 2648, and 2649. This is kind of in the same region that we were just in as well. So this could kind of pair with the last model, so to speak. So for example, we did do that extension of Edenfield Road. This could be something like, okay, we did the extension, now we're adding in some residential housing or something like that. In this case, we have a graphic parameters file called land use updates that we can use. And this can be found in our graphic parameters folder. We can also we'll read all the graphic parameters in. What we're going to do though, what this process is going to look like, again, I'm just going to give you a brief overview and then we're going to go through and actually build this out, is we're going to find the zones that we want to update. And there's a few ways we can do this. First way is just to go into the list and find the exact zone number that you want. So for example, you could go into the zones list and search for a very specific zone and edit that zone directly, as opposed to scrolling around on your screen trying to find the zone. For our use today though, since all of these zones are kind of within the same area and their kind of ID numbers are all the same, what we can do is we can actually use a filter and filter out all the zones that we don't really want to worry about right now. And so we're going to also get some practice using some filters in this example file. So how we use filters is we'll select the object that we want to filter out. And in this case, we're going to use zones. So we're going to right click on zones, and then there is an option to select a filter or to create a filter. In this case, what we want to do is we want to find those 4 specific zone numbers between 2646 and 2649. So our filter is going to be based off of one of the attributes of the zone. In this case, we're going to do it based off the zone ID number. And then we can use various filter operations to find and locate these various objects. So for example, you can say not equals to or equals to and find a specific one or something that's not in a specific region or something like that. In this case, since they're all sequential, 2646 to 2649, we can use the option between. And when we see in the next step, the between option includes the numbers that we enter. So in this case, we want to look at all the zones between 2646 and 2649. So we can type those 2 numbers in. And again, this includes the numbers that we type into the filter. Now, if you're going to be coming back to this project multiple times and you want to quickly use this filter more often, you can also save the filter. So you don't have to reconfigure the filter every time you open the file or something like that. Or maybe you pass this over to a colleague and you say, okay, enter this, use this filter file and it'll give you the zones that I've been working on or something like that. A lot of times filters are going to be used with user-defined attributes. So you might have a user-defined attribute called project, and then you have your project ID name in there or the project name. And then it's just a Boolean checkbox. And so you would say all of these zones belong to the specific project. And so in that case, you can use a filter based on that user-defined attribute to find all the zones that are related to a specific project. And then you save that into a filter file, and you can pass that around to other people as well. In this case, we're going to save it. We're going to create a filter, and we're going to call it training land use update, and you'll see that the filter file is just a .fil file. Filter files can be transferable to other Visum networks, but if there are ID numbers that they are referencing, or if there are attributes that they're referencing that don't exist in that other file, it might not work. So just be careful with that. And the point of the filter is so that what will happen is it will highlight the specific zones that we want to edit. And we can also apply these filters to the lists. So instead of seeing, thousands of zones and trying to scroll through and find all the zones that you want to edit or search for them one at a time, you can apply a filter file and then it will filter your list out so you can only see 1 or 2 or a subset of objects that you wanted to edit. All right, so before I get too far into it, let's go ahead and save this file again as. So I'm going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to call this one Land Use Update. And again, the reason I save ahead of time is because my base model has already had the procedure sequence run all the way through, and it has all of the results in place. So before I start editing, I'll save it as, so that my base file doesn't have all those results deleted or anything like that. So now I have my new file. What I want to see is I want to see all of my zones. So I can turn off my links and I can turn on my zones, but you can see here that it shows all of the zones in the network. So in this case, I want to apply a filter. So I'm going to right-click on my zones. Sorry if I went a little fast on that. This is what it initially looked like. I'm going to deselect links, so turn off my links by clicking this little white box next to the links. So now all my links are turned off, and I can turn on my zones by clicking this little icon with the hexagon in it. And that'll visually turn on all of my zones. Now, if I right-click on my zones object, I have the option to set a filter for my zones object. So again, right-click, select filter. In this case, we want to specify how do we want to narrow down our field of zones, right? The zones have a number of attributes, including user-defined attributes. So if we click on this attribute section here, you see these little 3 dots. If we left-click on that, it'll bring up the attribute editor or selector window that we have here. And if we just scroll around, you can see we have a lot of physical attributes represented with green dots. We have output attributes represented with circles. So these are outputted results. We'll come back and use these later when we use graphic parameters. And if we keep scrolling down, we have these little person icons that are representing user-defined attributes. So again, we are looking for, specifically, we want to pull out the zone ID number. And instead of scrolling around and trying to find it, the easier thing to do is just come up to the top and type in number. If I can spell, there we go. And this will pull up all of the attributes with the value, with the name number in it. And so in this case, we want the ID number. So I'm just going to highlight number and I'm going to click OK. So now this filter is looking, it's reading all of the ID numbers of all the zones in the network. And now we have to tell it which ones do we want to pull out of that list of zones. In this case, we'll take this operation and we have a few different options that we can pick. We can pick a specific zone number. We can pick the opposite of that zone number. So include everything except one particular zone. We want all the zones less than a value. In this case, we want to pick 4 zones that are numbered between 2646 and 2649. So in this case, we're going to say between, and the limits included are included in that between value. So whatever we type into these 2 boxes for the operand are going to be included in the filtered list. So in this case, we type in 2646 and 2649. What this is telling Visum to do is look at all the zones in the list and pull out these specific zones for us, and then turn off all the rest of the zones. Before clicking OK, I like to click Preview just to see if it works. And you can see that it grays out all the zones that were not in that selection. And you can see here we have 2646 kind of in there. It's maybe burying the other 4 because they're zoomed out so far. But that's fine. So once you are comfortable with your filter, we're going to go up here where it says Open and Save Filter. I'm going to use this drop down. And we can save a filter, a new filter file. Now, I've already saved mine on my local desktop, but we can hit this Save as a New Filter File, and I'm going to say training underscore actual or something like that. Zones. So you'll just type in the name of the filter file that you want up above, and you'll click this green checkbox, and that will save it. So now you can jump between different filters that you have saved in your file directory, in your working directory here. So you can see I have the one that I created yesterday. I have this one as well, actual zones. So I can pick between the two. These are more or less identical. But if you had a bunch of different filters, you could just use this drop down and it would automatically find all the filter files that are in your working directory, and you can pick between them pretty easily. So you don't have to like load them in or open them or anything like that. Once you're comfortable with your filters, click OK. And now our filters have been applied. So if I zoom in on this area of Tallahassee, we can find our four zones that we create or that we want to edit. Now, depending on your graphic parameter settings, on your map graphics settings, you can make it so that the filtered out zones go away entirely, or in this case, they're kind of grayed out. We have a filter file, or sorry, not a filter file, a graphic parameters file for land use updates. So in the graphics section, we have this land use.gpa file. I can drag and drop that onto my network. And in this case, it makes all the ones that are not in the filter red, and it kind of colors in and highlights in blue the ones that are in the filter file. But it's also turned off the IDs, so it makes it a little bit more visually appealing. It's easier to read what's kind of going on here. And again, that we have a pre-formatted graphic parameter file that you can just drag and drop onto your network editor. Okay. If we were to open up the zones list, we can right click on zones and say list. In the zones list, we can see we have 3,576 zones in the network. But if I click this little, we see this little red filter button with the exclamation point at the top. If I click on that, it will activate the same filter that I'm using in my network editor. So in this case, we have these 4 active. In my zones list, if I click this little filter option up at the top, it will turn on that same filter that we have active in the network editor. So now it's just pulled up the 4 zones that we want to edit. Okay. Now in the zones list, there are a lot of attributes that have to do with the zones and in terms of the population settings and things like that. The ones that we're going to use today just for training purposes are going to be single-family dwelling units, single-family population, multifamily dwelling units, and multifamily population. So this is just one subset of the number of attributes that you're going to be editing on the zones. But you know, instead of having us edit 20 different attributes, we're just gonna do 4 and call it a day for now. So what we're going to do first is we want to simplify our zones list. We don't want to have to scroll through all of the attributes. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new list layout, and we're going to look at these 4, we're going to activate these 4 attributes And then we're going to save that list layout so that we can use it in the future as well. And so our list layout should look something like this, where you'll just have your zone ID number, and then you'll have your single family dwelling unit population, multifamily unit dwelling unit and population, and then we're going to edit those values. So let's jump into our zones list. And again, we can kind of scroll over, and these might already be active. For example, we have single family dwelling unit here, and single family population, and auto, zero auto, 2 auto, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of settings that you'll want to put into these zone lists. But instead of having to search for them and find them in the list themselves, what we can do is we can click our select attributes button. We can customize the columns of our list. So I'm going to select this little screwdriver button here. And the attributes that we want, again, are going to be single family dwelling units, single family population, and multifamily dwelling units and multifamily population. Since I already know what the attributes are called, I can call it single family dwelling unit. I can just search it up at the top, and it'll find it in my list here down below. If you're not sure, you can always scroll around and try and find it. But before I add it to my list, I want to clean up all of these other attributes. Now, it's important to remember when we remove attributes from the list, we're not deleting their data. It's just a visual aid for us. So the data is still there in the background. It's just not visually represented in the list format. So in this case, we care about the zone number, and then everything after that, we don't really care about it too much for the purposes of our training. So in this case, we're going to select where it says code. And I'm just going to scroll down, and I'm going to hold the shift key, and I'm just going to highlight all of these extra attributes. So everything after number, I'm going to just highlight it, and then I'm going to click this little green arrow to remove it from the list. Because again, the attributes we're going to be updating are going to be these 4 attributes, and so it's only important that we know what ID number we're looking at, what zone ID we're looking at, and what these 4 values are. So everything else can just go into the background for now. We don't need it displayed for us. So once we've removed those attributes, now we can find our single family. And here, if I just type in SF into the search value, we have single family dwelling unit, single family population. And then I can do the same thing for multifamily, MF. So we have multifamily dwelling unit, multifamily population. Now again, this is just a training example. In reality, you're probably going to want to add in a lot more attributes than just these 4. For example, multifamily autos and single family autos and things like that. Employment levels, all of that, you're going to want to add that into this list as well. But this is just a good starting point for training purposes. So once you have these 4 attributes, you can click the OK button. And that should update our list here. Now, if you want to save this layout for future use, you can just come up to where it says select list layout, and you can just type in a name, right? So I can call this training underscore zones. And then when I hit enter, you see now it has an available dropdown. And so what this does is this gives us a quick access to multiple different layout options of our list. When you type this name in here, it should save directly as a list layout out here as a training zones.llax. So it automatically saves it as a layout file, a list layout. The LLAX stands for list layout. So anything you type in here will be saved into a layout file. Similarly, if you frequently use list layouts like this, you can transfer these between projects. So you could have copied this layout from a different project into your project directory, and Visum should automatically pick it up here. All right. So now that we have our zones ready to update, again, it's going to look something like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to manually update them here. You could also use imports and things like that. You can copy and paste from Excel or a database. You can read in different files and things like that to also auto update this, or you can use formulas to update it. You can use edit attributes so that you don't have to necessarily manually type in all these values in the future. But I'm just going to do it for now. I'm just going to manually type in just so we appreciate the brute force method. So again, I typed it in here. I'm going to pop it into the PowerPoint just so you can see it a little bit more clearly what the values of the cells we're going to be updating. As you're typing these values in, again, the procedure sequence will automatically know to take these cells, and it'll take this data from the zones during the trip generation and trip distribution sections. It'll take these values from the zones themselves and run them through the procedure automatically. So the procedure is already set up to identify this material, so you don't have to go in and update the procedure or anything like that. You could just rerun the procedure with updated values, and it will reassign or regenerate the trips in the matrices. It'll redistribute them, the trips through to the other zones, and it'll assign them to the network. And again, when we get to the review process, if we did a version comparison between this and the base scenario, you would expect to see under the zones, you would see 4 little blue stars that represent modifications, and it would tell you what was modified on each one of those zones. So you could go back and look at, okay, each one of these zones was modified in this way, right? We didn't add any zones, we didn't delete any zones, we just modified existing zones. Okay. And again, typically these first 2 models that we ran through, we did a network edit, we did a zone edit. Typically these are going to be done together, but we wanted to separate them out. Yeah, now we've reached kind of a good breaking point. Up to this point, we've talked about zone edits and network edits. After the break, we're going to be talking about public transit updates. So we're going to be adding in public transit stops. We're going to be adding in a new operator, and we're going to be adding in public transit routes as well. Again, we're going to be doing it manually, but there are automated processes where you can import shape files and things like that to kind of help you out. But in the meantime, we're going to take probably about a half-an-hour break. We'll come back at the top of the hour. But before we actually leave, we have some questions in the chat, so I wanted to open it up. Johnson or Chayton, we do have a list of questions that they've been compiling, so we're going to stick around for probably about 10-15 minutes and try and get some of those questions first.
Yeah, so we got a few questions and we thought it might be best to collect them and then answer them in kind of at once successively. So I'll start with more or less the order in which they were received. So one question over here was, if you select compare contrast as you were showing yesterday, between the build and no build alternative, how the link that was split will be shown. So basically the question is, if there is a split link in one network and that link does not exist in the other network, which might be the base network, how will that show up in the network difference plot? So in such cases where those IDs don't exist, the network is just loaded as is. So it would likely have a situation where if you put a node in there, there might be a node between the two, the link that was split in one network, and then the base network will be shown as is without the split link. And the diff value over there would just basically be null or zero. The another question over here is, assuming you connect the wrong node, can you do undo edits like possible in Transcat? So yes, so like Levi showed, there is an full undo redo stack in Visum, same that works the same way that it works in most other Windows applications or general software. You just use the undo tab or redo tab to undo, let's say, incorrect network coding and such. Then there are two questions which kind of are in similar line, which are related to the capacity calculation. So one of these is there no speed capacity table? Is the capacity for per lane? And the other one is, will this model be set up to calculate capacities using the capacity file and variable factor S file and such? So yes, the answer to that is yes, that we do have a speed cap table, and it's been implemented in the same way that the D3 model has, or Fusudimus just generally has. And we've implemented the same lookup that exists with the cube script and such for doing the area type area type, functional type, and that lookup providing a value for then the capacity and speed settings. So Levi, if you go to the procedure sequence, we can show where that step is embedded. So right up front, you'll see in this network that we do some network calculations, and then there's a script called calculate speed capacity. So this is essentially a Python equivalent of the cube script that would calculate that whole lookup table and then populate the capacity and speed values for the links. And as a result, the final capacity that you see on the link after the procedure is for daily total link capacity. Then we have another question about splitting links, which says the split is for both directions by one click. Suppose the count is on this link before, where will the count be after the link is split? So what happens in this case is, if you split the link over here, the attributes are copied over directionally in Visum. So basically, if you have a count going, let's say over here, eastbound, and the westbound doesn't have a count or value or a different count value, then the values will be copied over to both sections of the split link in the direction in which they are coded.
Do we have a count UDA already? I don't think so. Let me create one real quick.
No, those are directionally applied. So it would basically just replicate whatever field. So it need not be count specifically. It can be any field that's populated over here. So then moving on, how can I borrow attributes such as facility type, area type, postage speed, exists, etc. to an existing link? I'm assuming that this is related to the capacity calculation, where the lookup is used for the capacity calculation. The values for area type and functional type on the links are populated as an input. Then there's also a question related to splitting highway links and its impact on the transit route using those links. So after the break, we have the transit network editing exercise, and we'll be showing what happens if you split the link under a transit line. With Visum, since it's an integrated network model, what happens is that Visum internally takes care of that bookkeeping to regenerate the transit line over the new link setup. So that process is basically automated in Visum. Then we have, is there a schema to assign new known numbers to links that are split? So there isn't really any schema as such, and generally speaking, network IDs in Visum can be flexibly changed. So let's say you do split a link and certain node number IDs are assigned to the nodes that you wish to have in a certain other node range, you can simply renumber the node after splitting the link, and that won't have any huge adverse impact. Then let's see. All right, can the model be set up to run in parallel and two or more scenarios can be computed at the same time? So the answer to this is yes. So even in the current setup, the model is fully multi-threaded. So as you run the model chain, all of the operations that can be efficiently multi-threaded are already multi-threaded. Some of these would be the matrix calculations, the traffic assignments, transit assignment, and such. So internally, all of multi-core systems are being used for this calculation already in Visum. And for this, if you want to set specific number of cores, the setting is in the user preferences. So if you go to view and user preferences, edit user preferences, and then select that and click on the working environment, you can just simply pick the number of cores that you want to allocate for the calculations. The other piece about the scenario calculations in parallel, yes, that also takes place, and the scenario manager in Visum is already set up to use parallel instances of Visum to compute scenarios in parallel. And if you want some more background on that, you can have a look at our previous training with the D1 model, which we actually set up in the scenario manager to provide sort of training in both flavors of setting up models in Visum. And that was all the questions that I had collected. So now we can take a break and reconvene for the transit coding part of the training.
Okay, so we'll be taking a short break on our end, so we'll probably be back about 10 minutes before the top of the hour or so, 5-10 minutes before the top of the hour. But yeah, so we'll probably get back into the actual transit coding at the very top of the hour. So that'll be noon for West Coasters and 3 o'clock for East Coasters. Okay, everybody, we're going to jump back into it now. So let's go ahead and start by reopening our base model again. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to open up our basic model. I'm just letting it initialize real quick. It's just going to take us a second or two to get it open. In the meantime, though, I'll introduce what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be doing a transit edit scenario. In the last training for the D1, we ended up doing an update to an existing line. In this case, what we're going to be doing is adding a full new line with a new operator and everything like that. So we're just going to start from the ground up. And I just chose Route 1 by ECAT in Pensacola. If we look in our base model, just real quick, in terms of transit lines, we have some in the Tallahassee region already. We can go look at those if we have some questions about it, but we're going to jump over into Pensacola and we're going to create a new operator. We're going to create a new set of stops and a new line with headways based assignment. So what that's going to look like to start is we're going to just pick this line 1 and it's going to start and it has 5 stops and just does a quick loop. So it'll be fairly straightforward, but it'll get you all the basics that we need. Before I get into the actual section, I wanted to start off by describing what the different layers of stops are, because this can be we have different layers that help us allow for different levels of detail in our coding and do some more detailed microcoding of stops, depending on what type of transit facilities you have. So to start, we have the actual object that is called a stop. If I jump into Visum real quick, in our objects list, you'll see we have stops, stop areas, and stop points. So this first object we're talking about is the actual stop itself. This represents a transit facility of sorts. So this, what we mean by transit facility, this could be a single stop on the side of the road. It could be a park and ride. It could be a full transit center. It could be a bus depot. So this represents a collection of stops, either one or multiple different stop points within the network. Then the next tier, within a stop, we have what we call stop areas. And these are more or less modal zones within stops. This is where you might have a park and ride, an LRT platform, or a bus depot, all within the same transit center facility, for example. And these would have different areas that would represent different collections of stop points. And then the stop points themselves represent boarding locations. So for example, we might have a transit center that has various stop areas, and one of which might be our LRT platform. And we might have an eastbound platform and a westbound platform where the eastbound line routes go through and the westbound line route goes through individually. So we have this tiered approach to stops that we use to give us as much detail as we need. Now, for our purposes today, we're going to be coding in, if I go back a few slides just real quick, we're going to be coding in just these 5 stops. And each one of these stops is just going to represent a single stop point. So in this case, when we get to this point where we have stops, stop points, and stop areas, it's just going to be one of each, and they're all going to be kind of stacked on top of each other. Now, Visum makes it easy because if we just add a stop point, it will automatically add the stop area and the stop itself. So in this case, we don't need to build all 3. We can just build the stop point and it will automate the process in the background for the other 2. So what this is going to look like is we're going to start with a transit edit graphic parameters file. And it'll help us visualize the network when we load it in. Just like with the other 2 examples, we have a set of points of interest that will represent the stop locations as well as the transit line itself, its course through the network. Basically, I just took this straight off the map. If you have general transit feeds or shape files, you can also import those as well. All right, so before we get into actually building out the network, we're going to have to start with creating a new operator. If we look in our model, right now we have a couple operators around the Tallahassee area. So if I go into lists, and then I go to PUT supply, or sorry, I want to go to network, and then I want to go to PUT operators down here. So if we go to network, PUT operators, currently in our model, we have, in the D3 model, we have Star Metro and FSU as operators. Now the operators will basically hold the name, and they could have a base cost. There are other places where we can do costs, but right now we just need the name. That's all we need. So we're going to go into PUT operators, and we're going to add a new operator for the Pensacola region. And in this case, our operator that we're going to be adding is going to be ECAT. So we're going to be putting that into the network, so that way when we create our new lines and our new stops, we can all assign them to this particular operator. So in this case, we're just going to, again, go to Network, PUT Operators, Public Transit Operators. And in this list, we're going to create a new one, and I'm going to call it ECAT. And then click OK. And that's really all we need to do right now for the operators. The next step that we're going to do after we have the operator created is it's time to start putting in some stop points. If we could lay down the lines first, but if you put down the stop points, you can have them service the lines, and it makes it easier to kind of create the stop points first, so that when you do lay down the lines, they automatically get associated with the stop points. You don't have to do any extra work on the back end. So in this case, we're going to start by selecting the object stop points. And again, we're not going to have to worry about stop areas or stops, because when we create our single stop point, it'll automatically create those other two objects in the background. So we don't have to worry about building those out. So we're going to select stop points. We're going to use the creator option. And then just utilizing the existing map that we have with the points of interest, we're going to recreate the 5 stops that we see on our line route. So let's go ahead and do that. First thing we're going to do is in our base model, I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Save As, just like we always have been doing today. In this case, I'm going to call it training underscore, and I'm going to call it transit update. And I will be posting these files after the course. We'll just clean them up a little bit and then post the final versions. All right. So now that we have our new model scenario saved, I'm going to find my graphics, and we have a transit edit.gpa file that we can load into the network. What this graphic parameter file is doing is it's highlighting our stops, it's highlighting our line routes, and it also activated the graphic parameters for our points of interest. And so since we're not being we don't really have to worry about these ones in Tallahassee, so I'm going to zoom in on Pensacola, where we have our kind of the Bellevue area. We're going to be looking at this specific transit line right here. Just waiting for my background to kind of load in a little bit. There we go. So once we have our transit line loaded in, we have our 5 stop points indicated by points of interest, and then we have the actual line route itself indicated by the orange line. And in this case, it's going to be starting at this kind of tail end over here. They're going to be turning up this highway and then turning off onto Bellevue, and then kind of coming around counterclockwise, and then returning back to this first stop point. So in this case, we're going to select the stop points option. Network object, we want the stop points network object, and make sure that we're on the insert mode. This is important because if you're on the edit mode, you won't be able to create new objects. So in this case, we're going to select the plus. And now we have the option to create stop points. Now in this case, you can put a stop point. If I zoom in a little bit, I could put a stop point on the edge of a link, and you can see if I hover over the links, I can see the cursor points in one direction, in the other direction, or in both directions, right? And so in this case, we could also drop it onto a node. So you can put the stop point on an intersection itself or on a node, or you can put it on the side of a link, kind of directionally on a specific side of the link. So in this case, at this point, I'm just going to click on the star because I want it on this endpoint of this node. So I'm going to left click once, and we're going to get this warning again just because it's saying by adding a new stop point, it will delete the previous assignment. That's fine because we saved our base version again. So now I'm going to add a stop point onto this star by left clicking on it. So again, make sure you have your stop point selected. Make sure you have insert mode active, and then you left click where you want the stop point to be. In this case, it's not on a link. It's not on any direction of link. It was on the node itself. Then I can pan over to this intersection down here. In this case, we can pick a specific direction of the link. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to left click on just the node, just for now. I'm just going to left click on the node. Then we move on to the next one. And for most of these, it'll just be on the node itself. So in this case, you should be able to click on each one of those stars on the intersection. So you should have 5 stop points total. Should look something like this. Because again, we're trying to recreate those stop points in the Route 1. Okay. So once we're done with these 5 stop points, or once you finish, if you're still working on it, that's totally fine. I'm just going to quickly switch over to the edit mode, and I wanted to activate stop areas and stops as well. So I'm going to turn on the visualization for stops and stop areas. I'm going to turn off the visualization real quick for the points of interest, because I just wanted to show that if we look at one of the stops, you can see we have a little yellow arrow that is representing the stop point. We see a blue box representing the stop area, and we see a green circle representing the stop itself. So again, by adding the stop points, it will automatically add those other elements. So if we're just doing a standard on-street bus stop, for example, then you're just going to have one of each, kind of in like a little stack. Okay. All right, once we have our 5 stops in place, again, you could do the route first, but then when you go to add the stops, you'll have to go back and tell the route to service those stops. So by adding the stops first and then doing the route, it'll automatically assign the route, the line route to the stops. So now that we have our stops, I'm going to jump over into the next section, which is going to be adding that actual line and line route through the network. So you're going to select lines and you hit the create option. And there's 2 portions of the line that we're going to need to actually create. One is the line itself, and then the other one is the line route. The line represents the overall line. So this might be line 1, for example, and you might have a inbound and an outbound line route, or you might have a clockwise loop and a counterclockwise loop, kind of thing like that. So you might have multiple line routes within a line. servicing different directions or something like that. So in this case, we're going to first create a line. And by doing so, what we're doing is we're giving it a name, we're assigning an operator, and we're assigning it a fare system, as well as a transportation system. So in this case, we're going to be going through, we're going to be naming it. In this case, it's going to be Route 1. It's going to be a local bus. Its operator is going to be ECAP, which we created earlier. And then we're just going to use one of the existing fare systems for now. Once we've created the line route, I know this is just a brief overview, and then we're going to get into the software and do it in there again in a little bit slower pace. Once we've created that line, which again contains information about the operator, about the fare system, about what transportation system it is. Next, we get in and we define the actual course that those vehicles are going to be using. So the line route we'll associate it with a specific line. We can give it a specific name. Typically, it'll be, inbound, outbound, express, local, things like that. But when we get through this, what we'll want to do is we'll first want to make sure that all of our links and turns are accepting potential public transit vehicles. Some links and some turns might not inherently accept public transit vehicles. And so by checking these boxes, it'll allow us to do a good route search without having to worry about closures and things like that. And what it'll look like is we'll just literally trace over the links from stop to stop until we have a full line course. So let's go ahead and do that in the software. So we have our stops in place, or we have our stop points, which also have stop areas and stops in place. So now I'm going to select the lines option. And when you first click on lines, you're going to get this little box that comes up here. We can just ignore that for now. This helps us edit existing lines that are in the network, and you can see all the existing lines in the network. What we're first going to do is we're going to come up to the network editor. We're going to hit the plus button. And when we do this, we'll see this line editor box go away. And you see we have this little box that just says create. And so we're going to want to create a new line. So in this case, select your lines object, and then make sure you're on the insert option so that you can create a new line as opposed to editing an existing line. At this point, you can kind of click anywhere on the screen. We're not actually drawing the line course yet, the line route yet. What we're doing is we are just creating the information about this particular bus line as it is. So again, you're going to have lines selected, insert mode, make sure you have this little dot set to line. And then we're going to just left click anywhere on the network editor. It doesn't matter where. Just anywhere on the network editor, just left click, and it'll automatically give you this context menu here. So in this case, this might be Oak Crest / what is it, Kearney, I think. Kearney Heights was the name of this particular line. We might be a little bit more detailed about it. We might say 1: something like that, because it's the first line, it's the first route. It's going to be a local bus. And then as far as standard operator, we created our ECAT recently. And then for fare systems, we're just going to click fare system number 1. So again, this line, in this case, only has one direction, but it might have another loop that kind of goes the other way too. So in that case, our line is just the generic line name and number, and then we're going to have line routes that will represent the actual courses through the network. Okay. So now that we have that line in the network, the next thing we're going to do is we are going to create a line route. So I'm going to select the line route option. And just like before, I'm going to make sure that we are on the network editor window. Then we left click. Here we can pick the line that we want to associate this route to. In this case, it's going to be, Oak Crest and Kearney Heights. The name of the route might be counterclockwise, or it might be outbound, or something like that. And then we have the direction of travel. This just represents which direction is it going. We'll see this in lines that just are straight shot from transit center to transit center. For example, you'll have an outbound direction, which would be up, and then you'll have an inbound direction, which would be down. But in this case, we're just going to have just the one direction. So we're going to have a direction up. I'm going to click OK. So here's our counterclockwise line route. In this case, again, we're not sure on these links and turns if public transit is allowed to use these. Maybe when the model was built, for some reason they turned off public transit usage as far as like transportation systems that are allowed to use this. So we want to make sure buses are allowed to make certain turns and travel down certain roads. So in this case, we're going to hit parameters. And it says use also closed turns for routing. I also want to make sure we use also closed links for routing. So that way, when we input our new route, what it's going to do is it's going to try to find an optimal path between 2 points that we click. But if there's any closures or anything like that, it won't. It might create funny routes. So in this case, by checking all these boxes, we will be able to create a more direct route. So I click OK. And now I can come to where we have our first stop here. And I'm just going to kind of remain zoomed out a little bit, though. And we're going to just left click and hold. And then you can just start dragging your cursor along the links that you want to use. So again, let me kind of do this one more time. I'll just say CC for counterclockwise. Parameters, make sure we're using all closed links. You just start at the first stop. Now I'm going to press and hold left click and start dragging it in the direction of travel of the bus. And then I'm going to let go of left click at the second stop. So I'm just going to press and hold left click. And you can see that it's kind of highlighting the links as we go. And then when I get to this second stop, I'm going to let go of left click for now. So what we've done at this point is we've defined the line route from stop 1 to stop 2. I like to say fix all profile points at this point, just so that they get locked in and they don't get re-edited accidentally. And then I can press and hold left click at stop 2 and drive my bus all the way up to stop 3. And then I'll say fix all points. And I'll just do the same thing. Now, if they're making a turn or something like that, where maybe there could be multiple path options, see how when I trace around like this, it tries to find the more direct route. So in this case, it wants to do a U-turn and then do a right turn down here. If that's happening to you, what you can do is you can just drag to an intersection and let go of left click, fix all points, and then you can drag from that intersection to the stop point. And so in that case, you don't necessarily have to go stop to stop. You can go intersection to intersection. So if you need to have your bus do like a little loop or kind of do a detour into a neighborhood or something like that, you can do that by just going intersection by intersection rather than stop by stop. Left click and drag to stop number 5. Click OK. Oh, I didn't mean to click OK quite yet. Fix all points. Now we need to go back. We're at stop 5. We need to go back to stop number 1. So we need to close that loop. What's going to happen though is we're going to draw over to this intersection again. And if we go past that intersection, you'll see it'll continue on with these links. And I get all the way back to stop 1. Sometimes what can happen is you can get a little message box. Let me find, I have a screenshot of it. Let me go back into here. Sometimes what will happen is if you have a bus stop that is serviced multiple times, it will ask which stop do you want to have the bus actually service this stop. So do you want to pass it on the first pass or on the second pass? In our case, we're just having it bypass that second stop on the second go around, and we're going back to stop number 1. So again, I can define my line route. Parameters, make sure you have all links on. We're going to left click and drag from stop to stop. Left click and drag from stop to stop. Left click and drag. In this case, if we try to go stop to stop, it will kind of find a more direct route. So I'm going to go to this intersection, turn left to this stop, come to this stop, and then I'm not going to let go at stop 2. I'm just going to keep holding my mouse down and go all the way back to stop number 1, and that will bypass that stop 2 again. Fix all points, and then once you click OK, that will complete your route. When we click OK, we're going to get this message box, and this is okay because if you remember in the parameters we said use closed turns and use closed links. What this is saying is that this line course that we defined, this line route we defined, is utilizing links and turns that might be closed to buses, to local buses. So in this case, it's saying, do we want to open these links and turns? And of course we do. So we'll say yes for all. And that will open up those transportation systems for the turns. So for example, and links. So for example, if I double click on this link, we should see local bus LB is now available in our transportation system. Similarly, if I look at a turn, so if I pick out my node real quick and I look at this node and we look for our left turn, oh, where's my left turn or my right turn here, LB is included in my left turn, local bus. So that's all that error message is working on. Okay. So we're using headway-based assignment. So we'll need to add our headways to the model. In this case, we're going to open up the PUT supply list. This is going to be in our list menu. We're going to select lines. And then under time profiles, we're going to add in hourly headways. If we look here at this time that we have here, they have hourly headways. So we're going to recreate those using our headway inputs here. So let's do that. So in this case, once you've created your route, I would recommend also hitting save up to this point. And you can replace the file just so that you don't lose any network data or anything like that if you have to close the file. So we have our stops, we have our line, we have our lines, we have our operator, we have our routes. Now we just need to add in our headways. So we're going to go to lists, PUT supply. And in this case, we're going to select the lines and then time profiles. And in our time profiles, you can list that is opened up. Again, this is in the list menu up at the top, lists, PUT supply, lines, time profiles. We can see that we have our line route that we created, and we just need to enter in our headways in seconds. In this case, it's 3,600. So we get our hourly headways. And so now we've added our stops, we've added our operator, we've added our lines, we've added the line courses, and we've added the headways to the network. Okay. So now this is ready to run through our procedure sequence again. We can always hit play on it. Again, it's going to take about 20 minutes. So for simplicity's sake, we're not going to do that. What I will do though is I will hit save one more time, just so we have everything saved down. Because for the last little bit of this, what we want to talk about is we just kind of want to reiterate how to compare and contrast our different scenarios, right? So we've built out 3 different potential scenarios. We have our land use update, we have a network build, and we have a transit update. Now these might be in a real project, they might be combined together. That's totally fine. We just wanted to separate them out into different specific edits. But just like we did yesterday, we could always compare this to the base network, right? So we can come through and we can go file, and we can come down to compare and transfer networks. And just to kind of ingrain it in your minds again, compare current network with a version file. In which case we're going to find our base file that we wanted to operate off of here. Click open. The version is the base file. And then we're going to click OK. It should just take a minute or two. What it's doing again is it's comparing our current transit build network to our existing background data network, or our base model build, our 2015 base model. And so with that, we'll be able to compare and contrast the two and kind of see what changes have happened and things like that. So I just wanted to show this to you again, so we can kind of refresh our minds on how that looks. Okay, so again, with our model transfer, what we see is kind of a report of what's been updated, what's been changed, what's been deleted. So for example, we can look at our links. We can see we modified 64 links all along our public transit route. And what was updated was that their TSYS set was updated. So you can see how they've been given this LB across the board. So this is, again, tracking what did we do to the network. You can see objects that were modified. Same thing with the turns. We modified 63 total turns. As far as operators, we inserted a new operator number 3 for ECAT. For stops, we inserted 5 stops, and you can go look at each one of these stop points. For our lines, we inserted a new line, Oak Crest and Kearney Heights. So this can help you also kind of track progress and things like that on your model builds. And then transfer profiles or time profiles, we've added time profiles to our model. So this way, if you're doing some sort of model review as like a project manager or as a reviewer, you don't have to necessarily go through and poke through all the menus. You can look at this comparison report right here on the side, and it will point you to all the areas that have been updated and changed. All right, so I wanted to show you this again. What we've gone over is this compare and transfer networks with a version file. This is kind of the direct way to do it. But what it requires is that both files are accessible by you when you're reviewing or when you're comparing the two scenarios. So for example, we need to have access to our transit and our Visum update or our base model year. But maybe you only have the base model year or you only have the transit update and you want to be able to compare and contrast these without having to re-download them or go email somebody about them. There's another process we can go through in the compare and transfer networks where you can just create a model transfer file instead, and it's kind of the same process, but the difference is you don't have to have the base version file to load in. So we could create a model transfer file in basically the same way where we select the base and then use the currently loaded file as the target state, and we click OK. But what this will do is this will create a .tra file, a tracking file, as opposed to requiring the whole model. You can just use a tracking file and send the tracking file around as well. So this kind of is another way that you can do it that is detached. So if you want to send a quick update to your project manager or to a reviewer, you can send them a tracking file and they can load it in, or sorry, not tracking file, transfer file. You can load it in as opposed to having to send the whole 4 GB version file over. Okay. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. There we go. So here's just a quick walkthrough on how to do that. So again, you'll go into the file menu, compare and transfer networks, and you can create a transfer file. And then it'll create this .tra, and you can send that instead as opposed to sending 2 different version files. Okay. Now the last little bit is I want to talk more about these graphic parameters, these map settings, how can we utilize these graphic parameters to show us some important data. And the first one I wanted to touch on was how can we do a select link in Visum. So you've run your assignments, you've got your origins and destinations. You want to see, on a particular link, where is this demand coming across this link or this sequence of links? Where is it coming from? Where is it going to? Things like that. And we can do this using in Visum what we call a flow bundle. And so the flow bundles we can build out in the graphic parameters menu. So we go up to graphics, and then there's an option called flow bundle. In the flow bundle, it'll create a new flow bundle tool on the side of the window. So if we, go graphics, flow bundle, it'll create a new little flow bundle window on the side over here on the right. What we'll want to do first is if there is an existing flow bundle, you can initialize it by clicking this little fresh paper button right here, this initialize button. And then all you have to do is from there, left click on the link or links that you want to represent your select link. It could be a single link, it could be a sequence of links, it could be 2 links that are on different parts of the network, and it'll find all the paths that kind of meet between them. And then you'll basically hit this play button, and what it'll do is it'll do a search of all of the assigned paths, and it'll look for where they're coming from, where they're going to, and how much volume is on them. And then you'll be able to generate all kinds of fun graphic parameters off of it. So let's go back into our model. Now I actually kind of want to do this off of the base model year. So that's what I'm going to do. Because we don't have an assignment in our transit model, we haven't rerun the assignment. And when we built out the new transit stops and things like that, it initialized the assignments. We actually need a finalized run. So I'm going to open up my base model year one more time. And we're going to just play with some of the graphic parameters and look at select links and some other graphic parameters that might be useful. Okay. So I've loaded up the base model year. Here's our 2015 base model. We can see that it already has volumes assigned, and we can actually see that we have a flow bundle currently active in our model, and that's what these red bars are. But I want to kind of start from scratch and show how we can create a flow bundle from scratch as opposed to using the existing one. Here we've selected this highway right here. So again, once you've run your assignment, what we can do is we can go to graphics, and we'll select the flow bundle option. And that should open up this flow bundle tool over here on the side. Since we already have a flow bundle in place, I'm just going to hit initialize, just so it just kind of wipes it out and we can kind of define our own flow bundle. So go ahead and pick a link somewhere. It could be the same link. You can left click on a link, or you can select multiple links in a row. It doesn't have to be that particular spot. For example, you can pick a bridge. You can pick one of these downtown links. I'm going to pick one of these ones that kind of cut through the middle of town. Just going to select this link, and once you have the link that you want selected, you can hit the execute button, and what it'll do is it'll calculate the flow bundles. What it's doing is it's searching all the paths that have already been run from the assignment, and it's kind of identifying where did they come from and where did they go to. Now we have a lot going on with this graphic parameter setup right now, which is fine. It provides a lot of information, but just to kind of simplify the view a bit, I want to go through and edit some of these link bars. So that way we can kind of refine what our view looks like. So to edit link bars, you're going to right click on the links, and you're going to go to your graphic parameter settings, and you're going to go to bars. So again, right click on links, select graphic parameters, and then there's an option for bars that you can pick on. And here we already have the flow bundle represented in red, and we can see this volume flow bundle PRT is active. But we also have these other background volumes and things like that, and public transit volumes. So instead of deleting the bars, I'm just going to turn them off by checking these little X's at the top. By doing this, it'll kind of simplify the view, and now we can see, okay, whichever link you picked, you can kind of see where the volumes are coming from and going to. We can also do this at the zone level. So we don't have to just do link bars at the link level. We can create zones as well, or zone graphic parameters as well, that kind of show which zones are the largest contributors to our flow bundle. And what it'll look like is it'll look something like this, where you have pie charts that will have some proportion of outbound and inbound traffic. So this is kind of where we're going to be working towards. So we're going to do the same thing we did with the links, and we're going to start with the edit graphic parameters of zones. We're going to turn off the default zone look, which is the geometry, the geometric shape, and the icon in the middle, the text icon in the middle. We're going to turn those things off. And then there's an option on the edit graphic parameters window called select chart. And so we can create different types of charts on our zones. And in this case, we want to create a pie chart that shows the proportion of origin flow traffic versus destination flow traffic. And so in particular from our flow bundle. So we want to be able to see, okay, which zones contribute to the flow bundle the most. And so we're going to get to this point here. So in our network, we have our links, which have a flow bundle on them already. We also have our zones, but the zones have the default kind of look to them. So I'm going to right click on the zones. I'm going to say edit graphic parameters. We'll put this off to the side so we can kind of see what's going on. When I uncheck draw object, what this is talking about is the actual shape of the zone itself. And if I click preview, you can see that, draw point object, that is the centroid, that's the information. So in this case, it's the zone ID. And then if I turn off draw polygon and hit preview, you can see that the boundaries of the zones go away as well. So again, uncheck draw point object, uncheck draw polygon, and if you want it to go away right away, you can click the preview button and it will update your graphic parameters. Then under zones on the left here, there's an option called chart. We can create bar column charts. We can also create pie charts. In our case, we want to create pie charts. So I'm going to select the pie chart option. And it has a few preset link bars, or sorry, not link bars, but these would be pie wedges settings that we could use in place of our information. So in this case, for this first one, for number 2, I don't really need add value 1. So I'm going to click this attribute, the scale attribute, where it says add value 1. I'm going to left click on that once. And what I want to look for is I want to look for all of the vehicles that are coming out of the zone. And in this case, those are the origin traffic. So I could just type in origin at the top. And there's a lot of different origin data that we can pull out. But in particular, we want this origin traffic flow bundle private transportation for the analysis period. So in this case, we'll select origin traffic flow bundle PRT. Once I have that one selected, I can then change the color. You know, I like to do green for origin and red for destination, but you don't have to do green and red. You can do blue and green. You can do different colors. We have all kinds of fill options. You can put hashes into it and things like that. I'm just going to do a solid green color. Also, we have to make sure that we turn off any columns we don't want and we turn on the columns we do want. So in this case, origin traffic flow bundle, we want it. So we want to turn that on by clicking the little X at the top. If I hit preview, we have to hit draw chart at the top as well. So now we can see in our network, make sure you check this draw chart option. Forgot to mention that part. So hit that draw chart. And then you can select the preview option once you've configured your column. And you can see all of the zones that are contributing to this southbound flow bundle. Then we can do the destination trips. So we can hit, for this next column, I'll select where it says add value to. I'm going to find all of my destination trips coming through this flow bundle to a particular zone. So in this case, this is destination traffic flow bundle PRT. And then I like to make it red, but that's just a personal preference. You don't have to make it red. I'm going to check this box, make sure it's turned on. And then I can hit preview and we can see all of the zones that these trips are going to. Once you're satisfied with how it looks, you can click the OK button and then it will set it. So now you can kind of zoom out a bit and kind of get a bigger picture of, okay, which zones are contributing to this particular flow bundle. So you can see there's a lot of, external trips that are coming in. We have a lot from in these smaller zones that are a little bit disaggregated. And that's all just because we're doing this southbound select link. If I initialize my select link and I pick a different link and then hit execute, the graphic parameter settings will be remembered, and so I can just quickly bounce around to different select links. So for example, this is the westbound bridge. I can add additional select links, and we can always combine them. We can say first and then, so they have to first go through this one and then go through this one. You can also change that and then not go through this one, so I can pick all the ones that don't proceed on to this way, for example. Re-execute it. So this will find all the trips that go across the bridge but don't proceed on westward or eastward too far. So you can kind of pick and choose, okay, I want to look at all the people that are going to the bridge into this immediate region, and I don't really care about the trips that are going past this point. You can remove certain rows from your select link by clicking the delete option. And that is more or less what we had with the select link. The bars will show the link volumes, the charts will show the zone volumes. And we're a little bit ahead of schedule. We're about a half an hour ahead of schedule. So we're going to open up for Q&A for part 2, talking about, for this first part, we'll start with questions about network updates, the stuff we covered today, land use updates, public transit updates, and reviewing model updates. And then if you have any more questions about stuff from yesterday or about some other things about Visum in general, then we can get to those. But let's open it up to Q&A. So Chetan and Johnson, did you guys have any questions or anything like that that came in that we wanted to take a look at?
Yeah, sure. So we have assembled a list of questions as they came along.
Okay.
Let's have a look at those one by one. I'm just going to do the same thing, read out the question and provide an answer. So here we have a question. It says that in the procedure window, can you briefly go through the use of operations icons or the pane on the right? Sure. So if you bring up the procedure dialog and look at the operations over there basically create is to insert a new operation. Create group essentially lets you insert a group which can be used for housing different operations. So over here, for example, you see that trip generation, skimming, distribution are implemented in their own groups. And this kind of gives you a mechanism to collapse and expand these operations as you need while you're working with these. Then we have the edit. Edit simply lets you edit the parameters for given procedure steps. So different procedure steps will have different uh, things that you will edit in them. For example, you may want to insert an expression for the matrix calculation, set some parameters for trip distribution or mode choice, and so forth. Then delete basically just deletes the operation. So you select the operation and you hit delete to remove it from the sequence of calculations. If you don't want to permanently remove it, you can also check active on or off. So this way it knows to skip the operation if it's not checked on as active. Then we have duplicate. So if you want to duplicate a set of procedures, select that single procedure or a group and then hit duplicate to essentially create a copy of the same procedures in the procedure sequence. Copying to clipboard basically just copies the information that you have selected to the clipboard so you can paste it to Excel or a text editor and so forth if you're making some documentation, taking notes and so forth. Paste from clipboard is similar. It basically pastes information about these procedures from a clipboard that you may have copied or copied from outside over here, more or less Excel-like operations. Up and down lets you adjust where in the sequence a certain procedure or calculation is. So selecting the procedure group or a single procedure and pressing up and down essentially lets you move those procedures. Set all active or inactive lets you make procedures active or inactive at once as a group operation. And then some shortcuts for collapse all groups and expand all groups. There's another tab over there which says, or another button over there which says computation nodes and manage compute nodes. This is essentially the distributed computing functionality in Visum. So if you have multiple computers or if you're running a computer as a Visum server, you can set it up to have the calculations done on that remote computer and then pipe back the results into a master network and such. So those are settings for the distributed computing calculations. Those are beyond the scope of our introductory training. And like I said, a lot of Visum calculations are already multi-threaded and make full use of multi-core systems. So if you're basically using a multi-core system, your model without any specific instruction for parallelization already does parallelize a lot of calculations. So distributed computing is more for use if you're computing numerous scenarios and you want to harness multiple machines for it. Then we have the next question. It says, can you show where we can find validation statistics such as volume, count, facility by facility types, RMSE, etc.? And then a related question to it is, can you show where we can get regional statistic of zonal data, such as total population or employment of the region and county? All right, so here there are two parts. So for the first part, we created some validation measures and reports that we automatically generate as the procedures run. So if you go to the model folder where the files are stored, you'll see over here thing called outputs. And if you double click outputs, we will be populating trip length distribution reports and such in the outputs over here. We have some standardized outputs, but we are going to be working with the agency and consultants to basically develop procedures to output specific reports similar to how those were done with Cube, since those were also custom reports scripted based on the agency requirement and such. And going further up, in this same folder, we have certain templates saved for viewing listings and such. So here, if you drag and drop one of these LLA files, so let's say you drag and drop that Panda LLA file over Visum, this shows you the result of the trip generation procedure, and you can see that listed as the production attraction and so forth. Similarly, the SE input data and such can be laid out in the same listing. So we essentially use the same Z data table to insert those values over here in Visum. So they're all held internally in Visum in the sense that instead of an external DBF, you just house the data in the Visum zone data table itself. So that data is kept internal to Visum. And let's see. Regional statistics and zonal data, so total population. So yes, so through these listings, you can kind of classify and list data and different components for the zonal data or any other network object like links, nodes, and such. And in the D1 model, if you take a look at the previous D1 model tutorial, we have those reports automatically being parsed out in one of the model reporting folders. In this case, we haven't specifically put a model reporting folder uh, for this specific model because we'll be generating those as we go along and work on review of the model. Then, is there a feature for duration of bus stoppage due to such occurrences such as bike on bus and wheelchair or significant ridership alighting and such? So yeah, so in Visum on the time profile, we code a dwell time. So if might be easier if we just take a look at lines. If you go to the graphical menu and click lines, and then double click. So here for each of these lines, we code dwell times on time profiles. So now here, if you right click, and then, sorry, not here. Right click on the lines tab in the network, under network, and bring up the time profile listing. So list. So these are the aggregate time profiles. So this is where we enter the headways for the different lines. And the dwell times are set. They can be set by a formula editor as well. But the dwell times in this case can be set again on those time profile items by double clicking a line route. So now let's go back to the network editor and double click one of those line routes. So here you can see that we have a stop time field over there, and that's where you can specify the dwell time for each of the lines. There is another procedure that supports a bulk calculation of this, and that can be set through the procedure sequence as a formula calculation. So that way, if you have certain stop points or stops identified to have those specific dwell times, you can set it based on an attribute or a lookup definition. Then we have select link doesn't run after main assignment or require links to be specified before assignment procedure. You can automatically show select link flows on any link or zone assignment. For example, if in Cube, we change the Z data file, which is an input TBF is needed. So yes, this is one of the differences with Visum is that we have the path data stored along with the version file. And this 2.6 gig file that you have for one version stores all of the trip tables as well as all of the path data required for the select link. So the result of that is that you can essentially do select link analysis or what is known as flow bundle within this Visum menu on the fly. So you can select any link, turn, zone combination, and run a select link on the fly without recalculating the entire assignment and such. Then the last question over here that I see is regarding land use updates. What will be the most efficient way to replace SE data for all zones with new SE data, which we usually revise using new control totals? So the typical workflow that we have with Visum is similar to what you had with your DBF file. When you prepared your SE data and supplied the SE data through a DBF file, you probably made some calculations and put the right headers on the DBF file and saved that DBF file. So in case of Visum, typically you would prepare the data in the same way, like Excel or something like that, and do your land use input checks with the required Excel formula and so forth. And then once your data is prepared, you can simply copy and paste that Excel table into Visum into that zone listing that we had just shown earlier. So you just basically lay out the data over here and copy and paste it from Excel. And to copy and paste in a more methodical way, for example, looking up field names and the indices or IDs of the zones, we have the clipboard copy paste functionality where you can copy the zone table, and by clicking that copy clipboard, and that picks up the zone table, and then you can say OK over here, or probably tab delimiter would have been better, but that's all right. So, and then you need not have that extended one either, but just you can go to Excel and paste that data. And then if you scroll further down, it's going to be all tabulated as needed. These additional definitions don't get copied if you check off the option for copying over additional definitions. And then your SE data is basically laid out as an Excel table. And if you're copying and preparing your data from Excel, you can prepare it, paste it over here in this listing, and then paste this listing back into Visum again through the same editor, copy paste editor. So you can go back to Visum and then paste it back via the clipboard copy paste.
I probably selected the wrong headers and stuff like that. Oh, because I just manually grabbed everything. But
so just do Control A. Sorry, here. Yeah, you can do Control. You can select more of that data.
there we go.
And then go for Visum and try pasting. So here you can see that since those column headers were present in the zone columns in the Excel table, Visum maps all of those and asks you if you want to map it to a different attribute name within this table in Visum, or if you want to keep it the same variable name, in which case it's automatically in place. So then you can click OK, and all of that data gets inserted into Visum with the SE updates and such. So the workflow is essentially, instead of storing the DBF outside of the program, is populate that data table right within Visum and save it. All right, so it seems like that's the list of questions I had over here. And of course, if you have more questions, you can always email us or let us know through different forums, and we are always happy to answer those questions.
All right, I just wanted to point out one more time, ptv.to/learn. Oh, I'm sorry. You guys still got me here. There we go. Still got me, Chayton?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry, my thing flip in real quick. So yeah, just again, we have our technical resources hub. We're gonna be posting a recording of these last 2 days up there, just like we did for D1. We're gonna be posting all of the example files, including the final versions that I ran today, and then as well as the PowerPoints that I was using as well. So if you need any sort of review on that, you can go back through there. And then you can always reach out to us at support.us, at ptvgroup.com, or any of those other places that you normally reach out to us. But other than that, I think we are more or less at the end of what we wanted to do. So,
yep. So I think, yeah, thanks Levi and Chayton for the session. And, as Levi has mentioned, we will, of course, we'll need to update a little bit and edit a little bit of the video clips that we are going to have, and everything's going to be ready. And as soon as we have that ready in the next couple of days, all of you who attended this session will get an email with that detailed link, and we can start from there. And always, as Levi has mentioned, always we're open for feedback. Please let us know if you would like us to do some other types of sessions or some suggestions or recommendations and so on and so forth. We're going to be more than happy to hear that from you. So with that, I guess, unless there's anything else that you wanted to mention, either Chayton or Levi, I think we can. Yep. Okay. Then we can call it good, and then we can meet again during our next session with different models. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.